Well, the truth is, does it help? It depends on the sophistication of the client. Because I went through that same process you're mentioning, my first ADU. That's why I started the company. Was it was a terrible experience from a design to build. It was just a lack of transparency. I was quoted one price and then it went to another price. I went over budget like $70,000.
Hi, everybody. Jose Luis Morales here. Welcome back to another episode of the Morales Group Show. Today, we have a very special guest. His name is Esteban Araya. He is with Next Generation Builders, and today he is going to talk to us about how to get your ADU plans approved fast. So, Esteban, for our viewers that don't know who you are, is who is Esteban Araya, and then how did you get involved in building, designing, and helping people get their ADUs plans approved fast?
Great, thank you, Jose Luis. That's an awesome question. So, I'm Esteban Araya. I'm the CEO of Next Generation Builders. And the reason why I entered into the space was actually I started on my first ADU in 2016. I used it to basically house hack, eliminate part of my mortgage. I didn't need all the space. And so I actually lived in the ADU and I was renting out the main house. And that allowed me to really see the value and the potential of the projects, of the ADU project. However, I also saw that there is a lot of misinformation, lack of transparency, lack of pricing, so a lot of inconsistencies in the market. And I was in the private financing world, private money, for about 8 years, and specifically in residential development. And so that allowed me to also understand the part of how do you fund a lot of these projects or different ways to fund these projects. So I decided to get my general license, my general contractor's license. Together, actually, with my wife, we started the business in 2020, and now it's 2023, and we've worked on serviced over 450 ADU projects across California. We have about 25, 35 at any given time in construction, and about 280 in the various cities throughout the state. So that's basically how we started that.
I love it, man. Congratulations. So, for maybe like somebody who doesn't know what the ADU law is, what is the ADU law and what does that allow you to do? And then we can get into like the first steps in terms of the design process and kind of how that works.
Yeah, great, absolutely. So ADU law started really in 2016, but it didn't really become popular in 2020 because 2016 they still had a lot of regulation attached to it, and so only investors were really using it. But it was still pretty complicated, and there was more fees. So not a lot of homeowners. I think the first year, 2 years, there was only about 15,000 permits pulled in the entire state. So obviously the state stepped in again, and in 2020 they reduced some of those regulations or made it easier, more flexible, and then we went from 5,000, 7,000 permits in a year to about 25,000 permits in that same year that they made it more flexible. So basically, I mean, the advantage is you're a homeowner or an investor, you have a single family home across California. At the bare minimum, you're able to add an additional dwelling unit, an ADU, and in a lot of situations, you can even add up to 2 units, depending on some specifics, right? So that just allowed for many people to either house extra family members, be able to pay in one place, right? Or have some additional income by renting out that unit to the right tenant. So I think that was just a way for California to meet its housing requirements for the state expectations, right, for the next cycle.
I love it. How do you determine whether you can build one or two additional units on your property?
Yeah, so the 1 unit by law, every single property, or I would say about 1.5 million properties, because a lot of studies were made. You're able to add an ADU. By law, you're able to add at least one, up to 800 square feet. So by law, you should be able to add at least 1 unit. So whether that be a garage conversion, whether that be a detached new construction or an attached new construction. So again, you should be able to at least add one of those units for the most part. And in terms of the second unit, which is the junior ADU unit, There's some more restrictions on how you go about that. So it's limited space, right? So it's max 500 square feet. The junior ADU has to be part of the existing dwelling. You will have to sign an affidavit when you get your permit that you will be owner occupied on the home, so that eliminates the investment for a side of things, right? But there is definitely some advantages to the junior ADUs, right? Let's say you're a elderly, homeowners, and you're not looking to relocate. You want to stay in the home, but you also need some extra income. You could divide your home into two units without building new square footage, and so that's just the path of very economic way of adding an ADU to your home, right? So you're able to use the same utility lines, and so it's kind of a different approach for those junior ADUs. But the most common is definitely going to be just the standard ADU unit that you can convert.
Got it. Okay. And then what about the zoning? Like some people are like, well, I have R2 zoning, so I should be able to do it. Does it only apply for residential zoning? Uh, can it work for multi-units or high
Yes.
density zoning? And does it work for commercial as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually, for ADUs, because they're a way for California to add more housing, they specifically want it in residential zones, right? So, but residential can be multifamily, right? So that's considered a residential form of housing, right? So even if it's over 15 or 17 units, so they won't do it on mixed use properties, but specific residential or multifamily properties, you will be able to add ADUs or just single family homes. Multifamily is going to be a little bit different, the criteria on what you can do there. If anything, you can build more. There's more, lenience on, you're not limited to one ADU. You can do two or 25% of the actual size of the whole units of the whole building. But there's just when you start to enter into multifamily, it's probably not one size fits all. A lot of people I've noticed over the years, they feel that the state law is pretty straightforward, and it is. It's their job to make it simple. But once you actually get into each property and each local municipality, it's really important to have a feasibility done to analyze what specific you can do to your lot, right? If that makes sense. But if we spoke in the general rule, multifamily residential, you can add up to two or three or four ADUs in certain situations.
I love it. Okay. And then I seen certain city websites where they say you can do a junior ADU, but non-owner occupied. And then I've seen it where other cities like, no, it has to be owner occupied. What's the difference? Or have you ever seen that?
Actually, most of the projects that we've dealt with have been owner occupied, but you're right. Some municipalities are able to be flexible, but then from my experience, usually it goes by the state. If the state, you can kind of be the state says it has to be owner occupied at this point, right? But yes, local municipalities, just like the state says A, Y, and Z, local can make some adjustments and some changes. So it really just depends on your county what their agenda basically is, right? But I would say for the most part, the owner occupied is for the junior ADU, not for the ADU. There's sometimes maybe a misunderstanding with that is with junior ADUs, you have to be an owner occupied, but not for just the standard ones, right? Not until 2025 is what the law says, but that could also be changed as well. Everything is very
2025. What's changing in 2025?
well. The way the law is written right now is in effect is that in 2025 only owner occupied for every single type of ADU will apply. So no non-owner. As of right now, you're able to be a non-owner, but 2025. But again, things that were enacted in 2016 also changed in 2020. Things that were in 2020 changed right now in 2022. So 2021. So there's been constant changes. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's also something that changes.
So if you're an investor, get started on it now, basically.
Well, yeah, the way the law is written right now, definitely yes. And we have seen that a lot of investors. You can see there's There's a website where you can see how many permits are being submitted specifically per property, per type of property, and the type of work that's being done. And so multifamily has been busy, definitely
Is that
adding that.
only in Los Angeles, that website, or is that website
No,
in
that's for
all
the
of
state.
California?
That's for
And
the
then,
state.
you mind me asking what the website is?
It's just the hcd .org. I'll tell you actually just because it's abbreviated. Actually, for the viewers, I think it's a great one.
I think it's an awesome tool.
Yeah, it's an awesome tool. Yeah, hcd.california.gov.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and it is awesome. If you're into data the way we are and statistics, market share, then it's very useful for you to make some decisions.
Yeah, no,
For
I'm noticing that people are buying more multifamily because maybe they're buying it at a lower cap rate, but because of the ADUs, some investors are not factoring in that you can build up to 25% of the units. Now, when you factor in that extra 5, 6, 10, 20 units that you can add on, now all of a sudden it became a slam dunk investment. So it helps out tremendously.
our personal portfolio, I can't speak, everybody has their own investment strategies. I can't, but our investment strategy, our personal for us is multifamily. We go after 4 units, quadruplexes right now. And if we're going to do anything with single family lot, it's ground up. That's it.
That's awesome. And then congratulations on that. I'm doing kind of something very similar. On a fourplex, is there ever a time where they'll let you do two ADUs on a fourplex versus one?
Yes, you can do two units on the fourplex. Of course, there's some again size restrictions and things like that, right? So every property we have to see what's going on there. But in theory, you can do 2 units absolutely, which is great. You can even convert part of the maybe laundry room or storage room into an ADU, which is great. But at the bare minimum, you can do 2 units. We tend to see stackable units there, right? Built on top of the garages. You can convert the garages, so and build 2 units there.
I
So
love
those
it.
are really popular.
Congratulations. Okay, so
Yeah.
let's get into the reason why people are watching this show. People are like, okay, how can I get this done fast? Um, First of all, how long does it typically take to get from the time you submit the plan to the time it gets approved? What's that timeline look like?
Yeah, great. So that's actually a good question. So the way I'll answer it is I'll answer it in 2 ways: our timelines and then the state's timelines. Basically, the state average timeline, because that's another point of data that they record. What are the average timelines happening across each municipality and then across the state? So across the entire state for ADU plans, per every ADU submission that's happening, it's taking on average about 6 months. That is the average, right? And even up to 8, 9 months, right? Depending on the size of the project, naturally, and certain municipalities that are slower or faster than others. But the average is 6 months. For us, it's going to actually be pretty similar between 4 months to 8 months. It depends on the scope of work. So we can be as little as 4 months, and we can take as long as 8 months, just depending on the scope of work and also where the project is located. But based on the data of the actual state, we would say it's accurate. Some people will tell you either I can get it done in 2 months, and then most of the time those are the same people that take a year or 2 years, right? So I think over promising is very common in this industry. But the reality is, once you're dealing with 10, 15, 20 customers, or us 150, 200 customers, and you standardize processes, we're not going to be able to just put all of our attention in one project and work it in 2 weeks. And in reality, there's just a lot of in between time where the city, the ball's in someone else's court. There's just the average timeline is the average timeline. I mean, if you see again on the state across the 70,000 permits that they've had, it is about 6 months. So that sounds about right.
So let me ask you this, because I made the mistake. I've known about ADUs probably since 2019 or 2020, right when the law changed.
Yeah.
And I hired an architect, and then I hired another one, and they kept telling me, "Oh, the city or the pandemic or nothing's getting through right now." And I literally went like a year to 2 years without any plans approved. I switched architects, and then all of a sudden I got different results where the other architect seemed to know what he was doing better. What would you say makes a good design person or a good architect, and how do you vet out the bad ones?
That's a good question. So, look, I always tell our clients, right? I don't consider ourselves to be perfect, but over experience, I mean, over time, we've had experience. We've dealt with, hiring certain individuals that did not perform, and then the people that do perform. So I can say there's soft skills and hard skills, right? So in terms of the actual like skills or quality of that person, they should have at least 7 or 8 years of experience in architectural work and design, specifically drafting, construction documents, and working from one of those, at least one of those municipalities, one of those cities, at least in the state. And then also the person's character is very important, like, being on time, communicating in a timely manner. So being, honest, upfront, transparent. So those are just sort of things that, you just get better at identifying up front, or you filter it out better. At least that's what happened for us. But again, in terms of the experience of the actual architect, there's number one, ADUs are new. So there is technically a lot of new regulation that happened, right? 2016, 2020. So ultimately, a lot of people did have to learn because the cities were learning because of the transition. So they really did have to adjust to new policy and new processes within the city. So there were some things that were slower during the pandemic, and then they became faster. For instance, LA City, I'll give you a quick example. They enacted the LID, the low impact development process. That low impact development process, when they first made it electronic or like just everything digital, it took, before I used to be able to get that done in person in about 1 day, 2 days approved. And when COVID happened, it took them like 90 days to get that same approval. And then it turned into a month, right? Oh, once they had their process and system in place, and people kind of understood the process and system as well, and they had that situated. So little things like that was true during the pandemic. There was some adjustments naturally, but for the most part, I think just a lot of young architects or a lot of people looked at it as like an easy way to make cash. So they just jumped in and they learned as they went. So, and that resulted in that extra timelines. So again, just avoiding that for us is we have a team of over 53 team members. So I think you need to have, I mean, if you're going to handle a certain amount of projects, you should have the resources to cover those certain amount of projects and be very systems oriented to know what are the specific KPIs that you need to meet to be able to, basically deliver on your promise to the client. So we get, obviously very technical on our operations, which is fulfillment, because sales and marketing is one thing, but the actual fulfillment behind the plans and the permits is another one. So
Is
that's,
there a website where you can verify like somebody's experience? Like I know for real estate agents, you could go on Zillow, and Zillow kind of tells you how many homes they've sold in the last 12 months, how many active listings, and how many homes they sold in their career. For architecture, is there a way to verify? Because my experience was it was frustrating, to be honest, because they're like, oh yeah, we've got tons of experience. Kind of like what you said earlier. Don't worry, like in 2 months we'll have it approved, or two
yeah,
weeks or whatever it is, and then it was just excuse after excuse after excuse.
yeah. So yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I think they should on this show. We should get it, make it go all over the state. I think that would be a really good way to have a little more competition in a nice way, right? Like you said, it's done for real estate. For construction, it's also done in terms of how many projects you've built. You know what I mean? As well, you can have like a kind of a experience sheet, and lenders will ask you to see what's your track record. But for architectural work, they don't have that. They just have whether you have like disciplinary action towards your licenses, and then there's a lot of unregulation because you don't have to be a architect to actually do plans and permits. You can be a designer, and so designers, there isn't really a like a database of how many projects they've done, but that's a great idea. For us, we just have, LA City does have something similar. Like you can give clients a list of projects that you've worked on, and so you can see timelines there. And then because we build, so we also have projects that we can show our track record. But overall, it's something that's, yeah, it's a little bit, he said, she said. That would be a great database for the state to think of for ADUs.
I
Probably
agree with that.
probably piss a lot of people off though at the same
Like,
time as well.
what I was thinking is like, and kind of, I pulled the list of all the ADUs in a certain city, and I wanted to see who the architect was that was getting the most approved, so I could just go work with that guy directly and stop trying to reinvent the wheel and just work with whoever has the systems, the processes, and the procedures to be able to do that. But that was kind of a little bit of the frustrating part for me in that aspect of it. Now, are there such things as pre-drafted plans? Like if somebody wanted to expedite the process, like meaning can you buy plans that are already almost approved? And if so, like how much time does that typically cut from the process?
Yeah, definitely. That's actually a really good question for homeowners. So a lot of different cities, again, they're more forward thinking, or their specific cities have done, put together programs to help the residents. So one of them is creating pre-approved plans, and the pre-approved plans are actually provided by third, like companies like ourselves, right? Where we just submit the plan with their planning commissioners, and then they either approve them or deny them, and they bring those plans in. And basically, what they're saying is, hey, if you use this specific layout, it'll shave off maybe 2 months of your process, right? So it doesn't mean that you just get an approval overnight, because there's still certain specific lot questions that need to be addressed, right? Like foundation, or certain setbacks or height restrictions, and so there are still some items that you need to provide on the full set of plans. So it's not, a lot of times people confuse that where it's like free. It's usually not going to be free. There's still some type of fees that you'll have to pay. But again, to answer your question, you do usually reduce maybe 2 months out of the process, maybe even possibly three out of, let's say, a 6 month process. Well, that's great. I mean, that does definitely help. And then you can end up saving maybe 30 to 40% off of that, the design fee, right? If it's a little more standard. There are still some fees that you have to pay, so it's not entirely free, but that 30% savings makes sense. But I think what makes where that applies is if you have a very straightforward lot, the homeowner is really not looking for anything outside of those, cookie cutter models, and that's pretty straightforward. Mhm.
Yeah. What are some of the mistakes that you see that causes the most delays?
The most mistakes, the delays, from an internal perspective, because if the clients, let's say, don't approve a design and they're out of town, they're really hard to get a hold of. Well, that's on the client, right? Or they don't pay some city fees, submission fees, that's on the customer, right? So there are certain things that are in the client's control. And then in terms of in our control, I would say what's in our control is, again, like making sure site measurement, the basically the milestones of a project are being done as quickly as possible, having the fastest turnaround times. So if you hire someone today and it takes them a month to come out and measure on your property, that's not a good sign. You probably want to get that done within a week, and then you want to start looking at designs in the first 2 weeks of your file's existence. So I would say our mistakes would be to not do the proper feasibility up front. That's going to be the main one. If you do not do the proper feasibility, then you're going to come up with surprises later that are going to cost your customer money potentially. You're going to have to reimburse money potentially. You're going to have some extended deadlines. So I would say that you can avoid a lot of the setbacks by doing a proper feasibility before you start just designing and submitting to the city, for
Yeah.
sure.
Would you mind kind of walking us through your process? Like step one sounds like it's the feasibility study. And it sounds like at that point you're kind of just looking at the computer and kind of telling them, oh, based on what you have, you should be able to build X. Is that step one, or what does the process look like?
So the process for us is, first of all of most 99% of our clients, or 90% of our clients, are through social media. So they come through us through Facebook, through Google, or through Instagram. And once they come in through those channels, we have a department that filters them and makes sure that the scope of work is something we can help with. Once we pre-qualify them there, we then move them into the actual consultation, so the sales process, so the consultation. During that sales consultation, we're also asking a set of questions to make sure that we are indeed a good fit for the project, that they understand the project they're looking to do, or if they don't, we can give them some suggestions, that they have the budget in place, right? But in addition, simultaneously, we are looking to see if there's any major red flags of the project, major red flags. If there is no major red flags of that project, then it can move faster through giving you a proposal based on our experience and get started on the project, right? If there are red flags and it's not a straightforward project for the consultant, then there are two feasibilities that we do. One is a paid feasibility and the other is free. One, we can just send it back to our architectural team and they'll do a quick analysis on records of that property, looking at the property, and then give you a feedback if it's that simple. The second is if we actually do an in-depth analysis, we charge you $1,000 that can be applied towards your project. We go out on the field, we take measurements, we review the project, the integrity of the project, we verify with the city, and then we present you with some one, two, three different options based on an architecture and engineering perspective, right? So that's the process of feasibility. That's how we avoid, and we've learned that through some of our own mistakes, right? And so we've came up with that process. From there, we can schedule, site measurements, right? We can schedule design calls, and we can schedule submission to the city, and then finally the approval. But one important thing about us that's very, very different, I think only a few companies that are doing it, is that we are, for the most part, a fully virtually powered business model, and we like to stay that way. So we are again a fully virtually powered business model, and so a lot of our processes after COVID stayed fully virtual. So that's something we always explain to our clients. It's one of the reasons why we're able to maintain certain efficiencies and work throughout the state. So we try to be as virtual as possible, and only in the moments that we truly need to, and we've studied that, will we be going on site for those physical necessities.
Got it. And what are some of the red flags that could come up? You mentioned red flags.
Red flags could come up is, well, you have no space for one in the lot to build the actual ADU, the scope of work that you want to do. So the lot's too small. Another major red flag is you don't qualify for financing to actually do the project. And so we want to let you know that up front, because a lot of times if you say you want to finance or your budget is 50,000, then we will tell you right away, our minimum project is six figures. So we will disqualify you for that if you're not within that budget. If we see that there's financing that you need and you're not going to be qualified for that financing, excuse me, then we will also, recommend that we revisit this topic in another time. Excuse me. So that's something that can be a major red flag, right? So just financing not being at the right place at the right time. And if we need to work with you, we can as well over 6 months or 12 months to get you there. Like, what do we need to do? But we don't want you to spend thousands of dollars on plans if you're just, maybe if you're 2 years out or over a year out, or at least we'll do it if you are aware that that's where you are in terms of construction, right? So that's a major red flag. I would say the customer's qualifications, because a lot of people want to do ADUs. I always tell my clients, but does everybody qualify? Absolutely not. So that it's still, you need to be financially sound to do these projects. They're over six-figure projects. Rates are at an all-time high. So you definitely need to, be in a, relatively sound financial situation. So I say congratulations to most of our clients that are able to qualify. So the second, in terms of like regulation, is really going to come down to if, again, you have the size, if you're being realistic about the setbacks, like, no, I want it on my property line. Well, you can't, build on your property line and certain things like that. And then the other ones is going to be that you don't have any easements on the property. Maybe you're not looking to do something 2 stories or 3 stories, and so you've got this in your mind, and you just have to have 3 stories, but there's a height restriction for ADUs, and so that's not going to happen. And so, like I mentioned, the state's been very, very aggressive about qualifying people to build ADUs. So the problem is not really regulation has gotten very flexible. I'll be completely honest with you. I think they've done a pretty good job on that. It's now whether people qualify. Do you see what I mean? If they can get the right construction pricing and the financing. That is really the biggest major red flags. And if you look at the studies and the data for California, UC Berkeley did a study, San Diego did a study, LA's done a study. It's financing and construction cost. Access to financing and construction cost are the main determination whether someone's going to do a project, not necessarily even the city
if they
regulation.
qualify or anything like
Yeah,
that.
exactly. Yeah.
Now, do you guys only do design work for properties that you guys are going to build, or do you guys ever take outside clients for somebody just looking to hire you guys for the design process?
We definitely do work with just clients looking to design. Absolutely. We actually encourage it because we can stay on board, I always say, as a good team member, right? Somebody in your corner to make sure that what's on the plans is what's being built, that, basically the builders are going based off the plans, adding everything that's necessary. So we have other services, right, in terms of management that we can help with and also provide you with a bid so you have something to compare with, which I think is always, a positive.
How long should it take for someone to submit the first set of plans to the city from the time you get hired?
Uh, so on average, I would say now we're just speaking on average, right? I think every project is specific, can be specific depending on the city, but our average, our data, um, I would say with engineering, if it needs engineering, one story unit, we're going to be somewhere around 2 months. Yeah. So 1 month to really work with the client, get everything that we need for that, basically the blessing from the customer, site measurement, and then the other month to actually prepare the full set of drawings to submit to the city. Mhm.
And then from the time it gets submitted, what does that process look like now?
Again, depending on the type of project, how complex, some cities are more complex than others, right? LA City, I prefer, but city of Compton is actually, they can ask for more report. Not they can, they ask for more reports. They're more tedious. Anaheim, more tedious. Santa Ana asks for extra reports. And sometimes these reports can take 3 weeks to be delivered, right? So in general, right? And then, Venice. So there's just different areas, Burbank, parts of Glendale. So then my answer is, what is the timeline? I would again go back to on average, you should expect with the cities outside of those 2 months, that first phase, you should expect another 4 months with the city, depending on the project, to get that
And,
approval. If
and
you're in
that's
a very
basically,
simple project, you can maybe do 2 months, but most of the time it's on average, I would say about 4 more months.
now I think this is where some of the delays are as well too. So if somebody's looking to get their plans approved fast, one of the mistakes that I think our very first architect had, he's like, oh, the city hasn't gone back to me. The city hasn't gone back to me. And we called the city directly to find out, and the plans had been sitting on the counter for corrections for like 2 months.
Oh wow, yeah, that's very common. I learned that actually in private money, which or a mentor of mine taught me. He's like, hey brother, you have to have a sense of urgency. If you don't have a sense of urgency, be polite. You don't have to be rude, but you should be following up. Kind of making that consistent follow up. And there's a language that engineers and architects communicate with each other with the city. So just make sure that your architect or your engineer knows how to communicate because there is a lingo for sure. Just like lenders will know if you know the terminology or the lingo, just like realtors, just like escrow officers, there is definitely a lingo for planning and submissions and the architects and the engineers in order to help each other make the process smoother, right? But if they see that you're inexperienced, then you're making their job harder because your projects are unprepared. And so they have to now spend time on a project that's, just basically all over the place. You know what I mean? So it's important that's where it's important, the expertise, right? So
So
on both sides.
and then, is there a way for somebody to verify, like let's say that you have concerns or you're going through this ADU process for plans, and your architect keeps telling you, oh, the city this, the city that. How does an individual verify that the person's actually doing what they're supposed to be doing?
You can be CC'd on all the communication. You can ask them. Not all our clients ask us, but some clients do. They're like, I want to be CC'd with the plan checker at all times.
Is
So you
that
have a
is that
direct.
good business? Is that like does that help? Meaning, like, if you have a bad architect, would that help you almost like realize, like, hey, look, they're because as you said, there's not a lot of there's I would say more bad people than there are good people in this in the
For sure.
ADU plants.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Yes. Well, the truth is, does it help? It depends on the sophistication of the client. Because I went through that same process you're mentioning, my first ADU. That's why I started the company was it was a terrible experience from a design to build. It was just a lack of transparency. I was quoted one price and then I went to another price. I went over budget like $70,000. And I still won in the project overall, right? But because of creative financing. But in reality, I had a very bad experience with the professionals. And the truth is, the reason why is because I didn't know the process overall. So it did like what they were telling me was just so much information. I didn't know what to think. Do you see what I
Yeah.
mean? Like I just kind of didn't know where to approach it. So I would say that unfortunately, yes, you can be CC'd on it, and there's some things that you can understand, but then other times the person can just tell you, no, no, it's because that they're. So it's just it really becomes this like really unproductive conversation, right? So I would say protect yourself with the milestone payments, how you pay architects. I think it's important how much money you release. It should be per milestone, really. So what you receive, and that's something I always liked about real estate work, lending work. We don't get paid, or we didn't get paid until the project was closed, right? And so there was really no upfront funds. So I think there can be a similar pricing in this situation.
It's funny because I've had architects that like a lot of the money gets paid up front and before the project actually gets complete as well too. So
Yeah.
what are some rules of thumb that people should keep in mind when for payment schedules?
If you know the person has a really good track record and they're a professionalized company, then for the most part you can probably trust them if you've done your due diligence, right? If there's a clear track record, then usually they won't be very flexible on their timelines. I mean, on their guidelines. But if you're working with like an individual and there isn't a huge track record and it's just like kind of just a very small company, and there's really again no way for you to verify, then I would start with minimum keeping a 50% in the back. Do you know what I mean? Until it's approved, right? And even that doesn't protect you, but it does for the most part because at least then you can really set some good timelines. Like, hey, I need the approval, and I have your 50% here. So depending on the project, especially for ADU projects, if it's an individual, they shouldn't really go through more than that for the project. Because what are they making? 10% on a $5,000-6,000 project? That's impossible. Who would work for that? Do you
Is
see what
it
I
is
mean?
it is it bad business practice to an architect or a designer for like the last 100 plans that they've done, or what's a reasonable just to kind of see their experience? Like, hey, look, can you give us the last 10 projects that you've done and kind of like how long it took from start to finish?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can, like LA City, you can do it. LA City, you can see when things were submitted. I like LA City. Not every county has a portal like that. So LA City, you just know the address. They give you the list of the addresses and you can check it or you can print it out. So LA City, you can verify it. And again, now that I'm more in operations, I mean, in CEO operations of work. So I will tell you, I'm on my day to day, I'm no longer on the architectural side, on the engineering side. So it's a great question. I don't think there's any other portal besides LA City that gives you that, like exactly when the company submitted, when corrections came back, when they got them cleared, like that entire process. So if you're in LA City, you can for sure verify. And we have a lot of projects in LA City. So that's why I mentioned you can check there. But for other municipalities, I'm not entirely sure.
And then, how many corrections should one be expecting? Like, meaning, like, obviously, the more experienced you are, I'd probably say the less corrections. But the
Yeah.
less experienced you are, the more corrections you're going to get on plans. What's like a reasonable number to expect?
Well, the you're definitely gonna have the rounds of corrections. So you're gonna have a minimum one round of corrections, right? Minimum one round. And I would say that like our target is to have maximum two rounds, but there are times depending on the complexity of the project. So you can have three rounds, you can have four rounds. You don't want to have three or four rounds. And if you are having 3 or 4 rounds, it's because there are new mistakes that you're making. And so you need to document them, put them into a library, and not do them again. So I won't say like things will happen again depending on the projects and where you're working with, what cities. But our internal KPI for our architectural team is like no more than two, or like that's where you should keep the limit at. But anything over that, it's like it should have not. It should be a new mistake. If it's a new mistake, then we will say, okay, that's understandable. Let's just kind of learn from it. But yeah, I would say two rounds is the most.
Is typical because that's I think that's where I see the most delays. Like one is plan sitting on the counter, then two, too many corrections going back and forth,
Oh yeah.
um, and the plan sitting on the counter. So I would say if you had more experience. Now, if you were doing your an ADU all over again, would you want a architect or a designer that specializes in ADUs, or could any architect or designer do the work?
Um, that's a great question. So you are going to want, it depends on the character of the person. If you have someone that's like very active and will do the research and do the investigations up front, then they can learn pretty fast. If they're already an experienced architect in residential, commercial work is complicated as it is, right? The codes in resident and commercial are even more difficult than residential. So it just depends on the character of the person, whether they really want to attack the problem up front and get it done. They'll be able to do it. But if you have a lazy person or someone that's just kind of like unorganized, sloppy work, that's just going to probably reflect most of their work. So it's just more of the personality. I would say because I've seen both people would have 7, 10 years of experience and they just don't do it right. And then people that have 3 years of experience, but they have the ambition, they have like the dedication, the commitment, and they get it done. Maybe not on the first round perfect, but they figure it out right away. Do you see what I mean? So just it's the character of the player, and I'm sure you're familiar with that. So it's
Of
the
course.
individuals. Yeah.
Okay. Let's say that the plans are approved now. How long should the building process take?
The building process, that's going to be, yeah, that's where construction is I always say that's the non-scalable part of this industry for sure. I know a lot of people are saying they want to, but that's why prefab is making such in the market, right? So the reality is it really depends on the type of builder you're dealing with. I would say that across the state, how many, what type of crew they have, how many jobs they currently have, that's going to have a lot to do with it, right? So it's similar with architectural work, but of course, the amount of manpower that a construction project needs is very different from a set of plans. So I would say it really has to do with the operational style or resources, crew that the builder themselves have. So I don't want to say a specific timeline because someone would tell me, Esteban, it's completely unrealistic. I take a year to do a project, but I have 50 projects out the year, 75 projects in the year. And then you have some people that are maybe only doing 6 projects in the year. They're maybe charging more and they're faster. You know what I mean? With each project. So it kind of just depends on the actual crew itself, right? But I would say on average, again, back to averages based on our historical data, um, it's about 4 to 7 months, 4 to 7 months for projects.
Per
If you're
project.
taking over 7 months, there has to be a really good reason. So
Got
for
it.
that, or you're super busy.
How much does somebody expect to pay in terms of getting for like a designer or an architect, not including the city fees, but just how much should somebody expect to pay in that?
So again, like I've seen, like there's guys that will do it in LA City for like $6,000 garage conversions, $7,000. That same, but they're individual operators. That same project I will do for minimum $10,000. Do you see what I mean? So because I'm a bigger firm, I have a different operational style, maybe different timelines, more value. Maybe I provide management services for the construction. So there's other value that we also do add, right? But there are people that would do it for 6,000, and I'm not saying they're bad. I know a few that are actually really good, but they're limited and they only work in specific cities and only specific scopes of work that they know they can get done fast, right? So for me, my minimum pricing is $10,000, and then I will be probably somewhere between 10 to 15,000 for most of my projects. But when I'm thinking of companies my size, my competitors, I would say I'm on the more medium to lower end of pricing. So more of these companies, which are venture capped, uh, venture backed companies, they're going to be minimum 15,000, 20,000, 25,000 for their plans and permits.
I love it. That just the plans, not the 10 to 15K is just the plans, not the permit fees, right? Got it.
Not the permit fees. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Not
those
the
are
permit.
separate. I think we just paid about $10,000, I think, for the actual city fees. I think that's what it would range. So maybe 10, 15,000 for the design. Could be as low as $6,000 with maybe an individual, but there's also a lot more risk associated with that if you haven't vetted them out. And
Yes.
then maybe depending on the city, that will vary 10 whatever $1,000 per
Yes.
city. So you're
Yes.
looking at about maybe 20 to 25,000 in just without breaking ground. Now,
Mhm.
what about price per square foot in the actual construction aspect of it,
So the price per square
or
foot, and
cost?
I'm going to touch on something you said. Yes, definitely, it can be as low as 15,000 with plans and permits with the city, but that's a garage conversion. So I would say for garage conversions and junior ADUs, that would be the lower end of the fees. But anything new construction, 2 stories, max size, yes, definitely, and depending on the county and the city. That's why I tell clients having your budget or an idea of your budget is very important, because if you're stressing over a $2,000 to $3,000 savings, this project is maybe not for you. You see what I mean? Because again, if you're worried about $2,000 to $3,000 to shave and nickel and dime with somebody, a $200,000 project is like you're nickeling and diming with the wrong part of the project, because the first part of the project, the design, is where you want it to be done very well. You want to have the right team members because they're going to help you with the entire process, right? If they're a good provider. So that's why I tell clients, so you pay, you get what you pay for sure, right? And there's some exceptions, like I said, you're right, but those are very limited. Okay. So the point is construction costs. That one is really, again, going to depend on the area, because we deal in all of California. So I speak always based on California, and Northern California is always going to have more expensive construction, 100%, probably $50 a square foot on average more than, let's say, Los Angeles. Orange County is also going to be a little bit on the higher end, depending on what parts of Orange County, Ventura County, San Diego. It's all over the place. It really is. With construction, it really is all over the place. But I think there's always like material and labor, pretty straightforward across the entire state. Unfortunately, what someone wants to charge you per company is different. Like,
Yeah,
that's why I can't really touch on that, the square footage. But I can tell you that I'll answer it in this way, and I'm long-winded in my answers, because we analyze, again, so much of the data. Most projects can be built in California. New construction ADUs should be able to be built for within 150 to 220 a square foot. That's what the internal price of labor and price per square foot is not the best way to do it, but just to give you an idea, 150 to about 220 a square foot. And then it's just who you're working with and what their markup is, essentially.
after
That's how
that,
that goes.
basically.
Yeah, after that. Yeah. But
After that.
but if you're paying 450, I personally think the more that we're paying 450 a square foot, the more that prefabs are going to take advantage, come into the market, and be able to reduce those costs. So it's really going to, you're not really helping the industry by doing that. You're just not being efficient in your operations. Yeah, we all want to make a good living, but $450 a square foot, when I know it's like max 250. So it just doesn't, it's not going to be very sustainable for very, very long. And if you look at the taxi industry, the hotel industry, I mean, every single industry is already going through it. There will be companies a lot like ours that will come in, standardize at least part of the processes, be more efficient, and start to eliminate some of these overpriced competitors in the market, which we want to do, to be quite honest with you.
Esteban, I've enjoyed this interview so much. I think that you are extremely knowledgeable in what you do. I love the fact that you're process driven. One of the key takeaways that I liked is if you experience the problem, you should be documenting it to make sure that that problem doesn't happen again. We do the same thing in our real estate company. And a lot of the feedback that we get from our clients is, wow, that was such a smooth process. But the reason is that whenever we have a problem, we look to fix it forever. And it sounds like your company does the exact same thing. So if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, maybe wanted a consultation for design, or maybe wanted you guys to go bid out a project, what is the best way for them to do that?
Well, our Instagram handle, next generation at next generation builders. You can just send us a DM there, and we'll be in touch with you. Within the next 1 or 2 minutes. I think that's what the community manager has to do. So they'll respond pretty quickly, and we can schedule a call and kind of analyze what we can do for you. And then you can also reach me directly is Don underscore Esteban Araya. So Don underscore Esteban Araya.
I love it, man. Any final words for our viewers? And I love even how you're tracking how long it takes for a response time. Like those are all key things on good business practices. So congratulations on that, man.
Uh, thank you, man. So, I mean, we're very customer centric, driven. So that's our objective, and it was what you said. I think we don't believe to be perfect. We just like to basically take care of the problems, learn from them very quickly, right? And obviously not do them again. Yeah, it's a learning process, but we enjoy what we're doing, and I've enjoyed this interview very much as well, Jose Luis. I appreciate it. So yeah, I hope we can do another one, or maybe meet for some lunch and discuss the second topic for the interview.
I love it, man. Good. So for our viewers out there, we had Esteban Araya. He talked about how to get your ADU plans approved fast in California. We talked a little bit about what the ADU process is like, what are some of the mistakes and challenges that people face. We even talk about pricing, what is customary, and a lot of averages. If you've enjoyed this interview, make sure to hit that subscribe button. If you feel that this interview will be helpful to somebody, make sure to hit that share button. Thank you again, Esteban. I appreciate your time. And to our viewers, until next time.